There is a moment that every covert narcissist eventually reaches, a moment they never planned for and never see coming. It is the moment the performance simply stops working. Not because anyone exposed them, not because a single confrontation tore the mask away. It happens quieter than that, and far more completely. The charm no longer lands. The story no longer convinces the room. The image built over years, at every dinner table, every workplace, every relationship, begins to fail at the exact moments it is needed most. And underneath that image, there was never very much at all. This is narcissistic collapse. And once you understand what it actually is, not the myth of it, not the dramatic villain unmasking fantasy, but the real psychological mechanism underneath it, you will never look at their worst moments the same way again. Let us be precise about what we are describing, because the word collapse gets used loosely. This is not remorse. It is not a breakdown that leads somewhere better. Narcissistic collapse is what happens when the external structure holding the false self together, the admiration, the control, the image, the supply, is no longer available in sufficient quantity to sustain it. Remember what the false self actually is. It is not a lie layered on top of a stable person. It is the entire architecture. There is no sturdier version underneath, waiting to be revealed once the performance ends. For a person organized around narcissistic defenses, the performance is functionally load-bearing. Remove enough of it, all at once, and there is nothing holding the frame upright. That is what makes collapse different from an ordinary bad day. Most people who lose a job or a relationship still have an internal sense of who they are underneath the loss. The covert narcissist, in collapse, often does not, and that absence is what makes it look so extreme from the outside. Collapse rarely comes from one single event. It comes from erosion, several sources of supply and image control failing within a compressed window of time. Perhaps a long-running relationship finally ends, and with it goes a primary audience who reinforced the performance daily. Perhaps a professional reputation takes a hit. A project fails publicly, a colleague stops covering for them, a version of events they have told for years gets contradicted by someone who was actually there. Perhaps several people who used to admire them begin comparing notes, and the private complaints they each assumed were unique to them turn out to be strikingly identical. Any one of these alone might be absorbed. The performance is resilient. It has survived smaller ruptures before, patched over with a new audience or a fresh story. But when several fail at once, when the relationship ends and the reputation cracks and the private complaints surface in the same season, there is no time to rebuild faster than the structure is failing. And that is the specific condition under which collapse occurs. The first visible sign is almost always rage, and it rarely looks like ordinary anger. Ordinary anger has a target and a reason a bystander could name. Collapse rage often does not. It arrives disproportionate to whatever triggered it, a minor inconvenience met with a fury that seems to belong to a much larger event entirely. That mismatch is the tell. The rage is not really about the spilled coffee or the small correction someone offered in a meeting. It is about the structure underneath giving way, and rage is the only language available for that. This is also the phase where the mask slips in public, in front of witnesses who have never seen it slip before. A charming colleague suddenly snaps at a waiter with real venom. A warm, easygoing partner suddenly cannot tolerate being questioned about anything at all. People who knew only the performance begin to see, for the first time, what the performance was covering. For those close to the collapsing person, this phase is disorienting because it looks like betrayal, as if the good version was the lie. It was not exactly a lie. It was the only version that could survive when the supply was flowing. Underneath the rage, something else is happening that is easy to miss if you are only watching the explosions. There is a hunt, a frantic, often undignified search for anything that can replace what has been lost. A new audience, a new relationship, a version of the old story that might still land somewhere. Messages to people not contacted in years. A sudden reappearance in the life of someone discarded long ago. An unusual openness to situations that, months earlier, would have seemed beneath consideration. This is not humility. It can look like humility from a distance, the sudden reaching out, the apparent softening, but the function is identical to everything that came before it. It is supply seeking under worse conditions, with fewer resources and less patience. Where the original performance was calibrated, the collapse-era version is often clumsy, transparent, visible in a way it never was before. This is precisely why collapse can be dangerous for anyone who re-enters at this stage, believing they are witnessing genuine change rather than a structure searching, urgently, for anything to hold it up again. Eventually, if the supply hunt fails, if the old relationships do not reopen, if the new ones do not sustain, if the reputation does not rebuild, something quieter sets in. Isolation. Not a chosen retreat for reflection, but the isolation of someone who has exhausted the sources that used to hold them together and never built anything internal to replace them. Long stretches alone. Diminished energy for the performance, because there is no longer an audience worth performing for. A flatness that can look, from the outside, almost like depression, and sometimes genuinely overlaps with it. This is the hollow center made visible. Not a person discovering who they really are beneath the mask, in the redemptive sense many people hope for. More often, it is simply what remains when the scaffolding is gone, and there was never a separate internal structure built to stand in its place. Some people do use this period to begin real change. Many do not. The absence of the performance is not, by itself, evidence of growth. It is evidence that the audience left. Here is the part that matters most if you have ever watched someone you know go through this and felt a flicker of hope. Collapse can look like a breakthrough moment. The mask finally down, the person finally raw and honest and reachable. It is tempting to believe that this is the version of them you have been waiting for, that underneath the performance was someone better, and now, finally, you are meeting him. But collapse is not insight. It is depletion. A person in collapse is not necessarily seeing themselves more clearly. They are simply out of the resources required to keep performing. Those are two very different events, even though they look identical from a few feet away. Genuine change tends to be slower, less dramatic, and considerably less convenient for the people around the person changing. It rarely arrives as a sudden, tearful, 3 a.m. revelation. If someone in collapse tells you they have never seen things so clearly, treat that claim the way you would treat any other claim made under pressure. With interest, not with certainty. If you are watching someone go through this, a partner, a parent, a former friend, there is something important to hold on to. You are allowed to observe this without rescuing it. Understanding the mechanism does not obligate you to step back into the role of holding them together. Stepping in at this exact moment is often what allows the old pattern to survive, disguised as compassion. Every time someone reappears to catch the collapse, the structure gets a second chance to rebuild around them specifically, and the cycle you may have already spent years inside simply resets. You did not cause this collapse, whatever story is being told about you. Collapse was always coming eventually, for reasons that have little to do with any single person around them. You are not required to soften the landing. Watching with clarity, without contempt, and without re-entering the role of supply, is itself a complete response. For anyone who has already stepped away before this stage, who is watching from a distance, no longer inside the dynamic, collapse often lands differently than expected. There can be a strange grief in it. Not for the relationship, necessarily, but for the confirmation that the good version really was, in some sense, unreachable, that the warmth was real only under specific conditions, and evaporated the moment those conditions changed. That is difficult to sit with, even after the relationship has ended, even after you know, intellectually, exactly what you were dealing with. But there is also something clarifying in watching collapse from outside it. It answers a question many people carry for years after leaving. Was any of it real? The honest answer is more precise than yes or no. The performance was real in that it was consistent, deliberate, and effective. It was not real in the sense of being connected to a stable person underneath who could sustain it without an audience. Both things are true at once.